Welcome to this week's episode of Talk of the Town. My name is Philip Swicegood, and I am back with my good friend and co-host, Dr. Kenneth Harper from Vein Specialist of the South. If you have questions about your veins, give my friends at Vein Specialist of the South a call, and they will get you the answers that you need. Joining us today from beautiful Twiggs County is a man that's known not just well in Middle Georgia, but around the world, and that is Chuck Leavell. Chuck, thanks so much for joining us.
Philip, wonderful to have you here at Shoreline. Doc,
Yeah,
I see you on TV all the time. You're a good man.
glad to be here with you.
All right.
Chuck, we're so glad to be here with you today. And I think when I've known of you and known you for many years, I think of Renaissance man. It's one of the things I kind of think of, whether it's music or your interest in conservation. You've written books. I know you support Daybreak and Help with the Homeless
Absolutely.
and many other local organizations. You've been committed to helping make this place and the world a better place than when you got here, which is one of my passions for doing that also. But when I've read and studied about you, I think of family, your music, and your conservation interest. And, you know, there are people that are watching today that know a little bit about all of those, but I'm excited about learning more about what makes Chuck Leavell tick.
Well, I appreciate that very much, Doc.
You know, I've read you started music when you were pretty young.
I did, yes. I was the baby of the family. My brother was 14 years my elder. My sister was 5 years my elder. And with Dad out working, oftentimes it was just myself and my mother in the home. And Mom played the piano. She was not a professional. She was not a teacher or anything, but she could play. And it was highly entertaining for me as a young person. I'd tug on her skirt, Mama, play me something. And boy, oh boy, I was fascinated watching those hands go up and down and just listening to the music. And so I think as a form of babysitting, she would sometimes get me up on the stool and show me very simple things and sometimes leave me to my own resources. Chuck, I've got to go do my work, but you just sit up here and you can practice on something I showed you, or you can just make something up. And one of the things she did that always stayed with me was she would say things like, well, Chuck, what would it sound like if there was a big storm outside? And I'd rumble down on the low end of the keys and do some lightning strikes up here, you know. Or what would it sound like if you hit a home run? Or what would it sound like if you were upset with one of your friends? So music has always been much more about emotions and feelings and colors than it has notes and chords. Thank you, Mom.
You know, at what point do you remember that point in your life where you said, man, I think this is my passion and I want to go for this?
Well, I sometimes tell a little joke about that, and that is that at the age of about 7, I had this epiphany that this is what I wanted to do with my life's work. And so I was all excited about it, and I ran downstairs wanting to tell my mother, hollering for her, found her in the kitchen, Mama, Mama. She could tell I was all geeked up and excited, you know, and she said, goodness, Chuck, what's wrong? I said, Mama, I got something really important to tell you. Something important? Well, what is it, son? Take a deep breath. I can see you're all worked up. I said, Mama, I've made a big decision. You've made a big decision. Yes, ma'am. Well, tell me, what have you decided? Mama, I've decided I want to be a musician when I grow up. And she smiled and looked down and said, honey, you can't do both.
That's great.
That's fantastic.
So, isn't it a blessing at an early age to kind of have a calling for what you want to pursue with your life?
Yeah, it was. And I've told this story many times, but it was really a little bit later when I was around the age of 12 or 13. I went to a Ray Charles concert in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where I grew up. He was playing the Coliseum there, and my sister had a date to go. My parents had something to do, and they sort of egged my sister on to see if she would take me along. And boy, oh boy, it just changed my life, literally.
Wow.
Ray was so amazing, not just him, but the entire band. You had Fathead Newman on sax, you had the Raylettes singing, you had Billy Preston playing organ at the time, a very young Billy Preston who eventually wound up playing some with the Rolling Stones and with others and became a significant solo artist in his own right. But I left that concert at a as a 12-year-old, saying to myself, if I could ever be in a band, not necessarily a band that sounded exactly like that, but if I could ever be in a band that would move people the way that just moved me, that's what I would like to have as a goal in my life. So I'm still working at it.
Good for you. So, Chuck, you started on the Southern rock and roll scene at the very beginning. What was it like getting your start in Macon and at Capricorn, and how did Macon shape your music career and influence you?
Well, I had fooled around in Alabama. Of course, many of your viewers will know the Muscle Shoals area. It was had a lot of studios, and there was some degree of opportunity there. And I did work in Muscle Shoals a little bit. But what I realized, and you have to understand, I was 17 years old at the time, that the older musicians, more experienced musicians, were going to get those first call for the recording sessions. And, I would get breadcrumbs, if anything. And I did get a few breadcrumbs, and it was helpful. But I had a connection concerning Capricorn Studios, Capricorn Records in Macon. A friend of mine who was a bit of a mentor, Paul Hornsby, who lives in Macon now, had moved to Macon at the bequest of Phil Walden and the Capricorn team to become a studio musician and to produce records. Well, my feeling was, my goodness, what's going on in Macon, Georgia? Paul's going over there. I better go see what it's all about. So I packed up my Oldsmobile Cutlass 1965 station wagon and drove over to Macon and took a tour of, at the time, state-of-the-art studio, beautiful offices. There was a booking agency called Paragon, and I saw that this was opportunity. They were looking for people to come over, and they encouraged me, yeah, if you just come over, we'll find you something to do. So that was encouraging, and that was 1969, and I moved over in earnest in 1970 and started kind of working up the ladder of the record company.
Right. And the rest is history.
Yeah. Yes, by 1972, I had been asked to play on Greg Allman's first solo record called Laid Back. And that led to some jam sessions with all the rest of the members of the Allman Brothers Band. And within about 3 weeks of these jam sessions and this recording Greg's record, I was asked to be in the Allman Brothers, and I barely turned 20 years old at the time.
Did you think long about that?
I tried to be coy. Well, yes.
So was it a shock? Was it a big surprise?
Well, it was funny because everything had gone very well with Greg's solo record, and he said something to me at one of the recording sessions and he said, by the way, you're in the band. And I said, what does that mean? I couldn't fathom that it meant that I was going to be asked to be in the Allman Brothers Band, but it was just a passing comment. And so it was a few days later that I got a call from Phil Walden saying, I want to see you in my office. What have I done wrong? Got to go see the principal here. And all the band members were in the room, which shocked me, and a few pleasantries went down, and then the shoe dropped. And wow, of course I said yes very quickly.
If you're a professional, there are things that you remember about a night that was magical in your career, or whether you're a physician or whatever,
Sure.
when things just are over the top, the best they could possibly be. Would you mind sharing us a few of those remembrances you have and in your career?
The first one that pops into my mind, and I think it has to do with the current very sad and disturbing situation in Ukraine with Russia invading, and that is in 1990 we did a tour of Europe, and the wall had fallen in 1989. One of the cities that we played in was the former Czechoslovakia in Prague. And Václav Havel had just come into power, met with the band, and of course he was a poet and a dissident and just this brilliant figure. And we had 130,000 people attend this concert. Prague is such a beautiful, beautiful city. It was stunning to be there and just to see the beautiful architecture and to feel this freedom feeling that was going around. Everyone was reveling in the feeling of freedom because of the wall had fallen. And I'll never forget the posters read, "Tanks roll out, stones roll in." So that was a very special time, and I can't help but reflect on that now and thinking of those poor people in Ukraine. And I sure hope something gets settled with that sooner rather than later.
That reminds me, your legacy has been long and ongoing with the Rolling Stones. How did that come about?
The story of my career has been one thing leads to another, and because of my relationship with the Allman Brothers Band and the years that I worked with them, and one of the promoters that we oftentimes worked with was Bill Graham. He was kind of an enigmatic figure in rock and roll history. He had the Fillmore East, the Fillmore West, and he promoted many concerts, and was also manager of Santana for a while and other artists. And he became tour director for the Rolling Stones in 1981, and they wanted to try some different people out. My name got mentioned because of Bill. He passed it on, and out of the blue, I get this phone call, requesting an audition. And it was kind of funny because at the time, my wife, Rose Lane, had inherited about 1,000 acres of land, and I had this interest now, coming up with forestry and the environment and conservation, et cetera, et cetera. And so I came home a little frustrated because I had a trio that wasn't really going anywhere, and the phone was not ringing that much for recording sessions. And so I vented to Rose Lane a little bit, some frustration. Geez, I'm never going to quit music, but the phone's not ringing, blah, blah, blah. And so she said, "Well, all that's interesting, Chuck, but guess what? The Rolling Stones called you today."
Wow.
True story. And I thought she was joking at first, but she said, "Here's the number, there's the phone." I went and called, and within a few hours, I got a call back saying, "Can you be here tomorrow?"
Really? Wow.
And there you go.
Now, family's a big thing to you.
It is, yeah.
And how'd y'all meet? How'd you and Roseline know? I remember the day I met my wife and
Of course.
Terry, and what the difference it made in my life, and obviously it's been similar in your life. Tell us a little bit about.
Well, it was my first trip to Macon, 1969, when the doors of the offices of the record company opened. There were these two beautiful women. One was my now wife, and the other was this wonderful, beautiful woman that was working for Phil Walden. Rose Lane was working for Frank Fenter, who was the vice president. And so it took a couple of years to get a position with the Allman Brothers Band and to, make a dime or two to get up the courage to ask her out. But I did. It was New Year's Eve of 1972 going into 73. We had our first date, and we were married in 73. So 49 years now.
Wow.
I'm a mom and a professional outside sales representative, always on the go. I enjoy spending time working in my yard, shopping, and going on long walks. After being pregnant with my second child, I was left with terrible varicose veins in both legs. This caused heaviness, pain, and swelling, which I dealt with for years, but it was more of a cosmetic issue. I wanted great-looking legs. Then a friend told me about Vein Specialist of the South. This office wasn't what I expected. They listened to my concerns, and the staff were extremely caring and informative about the procedure and what to expect. Plus, the procedure had minimal downtime. Since having the procedure, my legs feel amazing, and I have my youthful legs back. I would have addressed it years ago if I'd have known how easy it was. If you want 5-star vein care, I encourage you to call Vein Specialist of the South today.
After you married Roseline, and at some point you decided you were not only going to be a musician, but a conservationist and a tree farmer. So how'd your friends, I read what Mick Jagger said about it in that book that you wrote about rock and roll, but how'd that go down? And obviously it means a lot to you and to all of us.
Well, when Rose Lane inherited the land, it was a diversified farm. They had row crops, they had livestock, and they had a little bit of timber. And so I started studying the options of what to do. Of course, we knew it was family land. We certainly wanted to hold on to it. but what do you do with it? And so I started this journey, and it seemed to me that row cropping, livestock, that was a lot of day to day. And then it sort of dawned on me, I had a personal connection when I started thinking about the resource of wood. That is, where does that thing that has given me so much joy and such a great career all my life come from? And, you know, the resource of wood, as do most musical instruments. And so I don't know, there was a spiritual connection there for me. And I thought, you know, if I could, and by the way, it's not day to day. You can plant the trees, manage them properly, but you don't have to tend them every day. So that piqued my interest, and I started studying forestry, and I eventually entered into a correspondence course while I was traveling with the fabulous Thunderbirds, a little Texas blues band that had a couple of hit records. And I would be doing my homework in the back of the bus or in dressing rooms or whatever. It took about a year to get through this course and it was not like taking a 4-year forestry course, don't get me wrong, but it gave me enough confidence and information to understand most of the processes, and I still consider myself a student. You know, I love working in the realm of forestry and conservation. And, you know, when you think of the other things trees and forests do for us, they clean our air, they clean our water, they provide materials to make our homes and schools and churches and offices. And, you know, it's just such an incredible resource, the most important resource, I think. And especially now in the days when we're concerned with global warming, climate change, carbon sequestration. There is no better sequester of carbon than forest. So I just believe it's the most important resource we have, and we have to really be careful how we take care of it.
So, as Dr. Harper was alluding to earlier, I think Mick Jagger on the back of one of your books said that you were so passionate about forestry that he sometimes got tired of you talking about it so much. So it's a great line if anyone gets a chance to read one of his books. But talk to us a little bit about your plan for this property and what forestry would look like for a piece of property like this. Are you guys cutting timber very often? Like what exactly does that look like?
Well, sustainable management is, I think, the phrase that we need to focus on. What does that mean? In the terms of what we do here and what other tree farmers do, it means planting, growing, and managing more trees than you're taking off the landscape so that it's perpetual. As a matter of fact, I prefer that word perpetual. That's what you want. You want a perpetual forest. We want to perpetuate our forests and make sure that they're always here. And there are trouble spots in the world. When you look at the Amazon basin, what's happened there with the loss of the rainforest and other parts of the world. So there's a lot of programs. I won't expound too much upon all that right now, but if people are interested, you can research a little bit and find ways to. The Arbor Day Foundation, for instance, is a great organization. The American Tree Farm system, the American Forest Foundation. There's a lot of organizations that do great work in this realm.
Now, you also wrote a children's book, right?
Yes, you know, I wrote the first book I wrote was called Forever Green: The History and Hope of the American Forest. And I wrote that because I realized there was so much misconception about what the practice of forestry is. And in promoting that book, there it is, and in promoting this book and going around and talking to people about it, the thought came to me, there's no more important thing than to reach children at a very young age, you know, at a 5-6-year-old age when they're just beginning to comprehend and understand things. And so that's what the children's book, The Tree Farmer, is all about. It's just a little story about a grandson that visits his grandfather's tree farm for the first time and begins to understand what a tree farm is. So we've had a lot of fun with that one. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you have a fantastic documentary on Amazon that I just found fascinating in preparation for this interview. You've played with, on the documentary, Eric Church, Billy Bob Thornton, John Mayer. I mean, people literally across the spectrum, and it's just a fascinating documentary, and I can't recommend it enough to anyone that might be watching this. But despite having all of the success with the documentary, even talking to you before we came on air, you're very humble, you're very down to earth. Where do you think that comes from?
Well, you're kind to say so. Parents, my mom and dad, I would like to think raised all three of us children to be kind, thoughtful, generous, and behave ourselves. Behave yourself, Chuck. But we had good influences in that regard for sure. And thanks for mentioning the documentary is called The Tree Man, Chuck Leavell, The Tree Man. The reason I wanted to do this mainly was to have a document for grandchildren and for future generations, and also to have a little snapshot of time of an era, which would be basically from around 1970 to the present time, and focus a little bit on what music has been like through that time period, and then what our relationship as a family has been like through that time.
Right. And I see that the music has been so influential in the culture. It's oftentimes responded to cultural things we know need to change, and music can say things that other people can't say.
Well, I think you're so right in this. And when you think of artists like Bob Dylan, that writes the truth and brings the truth to the people in song, and others that do the same thing. And again, we're in a bit of a topsy-turvy world right now, and music helps unite people, and that's the important thing. It's not a divisive thing; it's an inclusive thing. Right. So
now you recently are doing a series on PBS, and I want you to tell us our audience a little bit about that, because it's ongoing, and I know you're passionate about that. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, thank you for mentioning. When you go back to talking about the books and the advocacy that I've tried to do on behalf of forestry and the environmental issues and conservation issues, I think there's no better way to get these messages out to the people than to have a television program where you can visually show people things and you can interview others that are involved. And there's no shortage of content when we talk about our forests. And so the program is called America's Forests with Chuck Leavell. And the real hope is, the goal would be to eventually have the world's forests, because forests occur all over our planet, and they're all different, and they're all very interesting in their own ways, the different species, the different climates, et cetera, the different flora and fauna that exist within these different types of forests. So we've shot 9 episodes to date. We're shooting our 10th episode later this month. It's been a little bit state by state. We've done episodes in California, Oregon, 2 episodes in Colorado. We've done South Carolina and some others. And so this one will be in Minnesota. We're looking forward to going up there.
You've shared with us kind of your passion for music and how you got involved. There are young people watching this show today who maybe want to follow in your footsteps. If you were, what would you say to someone if they were sitting in this seat today and they said, "Look, I'm passionate about music. I feel it's my calling." What would you tell them?
Honestly, go to medical school. It's not an easy path, especially these days. Things are so much different than they were when I was coming up. There were more venues to play. The revenue streams were easier. Now that you have downloading and streaming, the revenue streams are very, very low. But look, if you have a passion for music, there's no easy answer. It's just like in your profession, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of dedication. Don't be afraid to fail. Right. Don't be afraid to make some mistakes. And if you stick with it and work hard and hard and hard, and that passion you find, my dad used to say there's an art to everything. And if you work hard, you'll find the art in it, if you are that dedicated and if you're willing to spend the time that it takes.
So go for it.
Go for it.
But it's hard work,
Yeah.
and you need a few breaks.
Yeah, of course, luck it always helps if you can get it.
Like
But-
that call from the Rolling Stones, or
But another, old sayings were a big deal in my house. And another thing my dad used to say, and I always took this to heart, is you make your own luck. What does that mean? It means, working hard. It means being prepared. I like the 5 P's. Proper preparation prevents poor performance. So, if you do the homework and think ahead, and that way you can begin to make your own luck.
so if you're listening today, got that. That's a great answer. So thanks.
Okay, pleasure to be
Chuck,
with you
thanks
guys.
so much. We appreciate
Yes,
you
sir.
coming and joining us, and thank you for having us out to your farm. It's absolutely gorgeous here. We hope to do it again with you in the future. So
I
thank you.
appreciate that. A real joy to be with you guys. Thank you so much.
And guys, thank y'all for joining us at home. Stay tuned for where me and Dr. Harper might show up next. You never know where that might be.